The night before Thanksgiving, the text arrived, short and cold. Stop by if you're free. The next morning, over leftovers, I casually mentioned my company's new valuation and my stake in it. The turkey carving knife stopped midair. The entire kitchen fell into a silence as thick as the first snow. My name is Laura Schultz. I am a product of Pine Harbor, Maine, which is to say, I am built from salt, granite, and quiet resentment. Our town is beautiful in the way that postcards are beautiful. All rugged coastline and dignified pine trees, freezing you out while smiling. I am in my late 20s now, but the mold of this place, of my family's house, was set deep and early. My family is a solar system, and my sister, Marin, is the sun. It has always been this way. We are 4 bodies, Mom, Dad, me, and Marin, but only one has gravity. My mother's Facebook page, a digital shrine, has not featured a photograph of me since I was, perhaps, 8 years old, and accidentally in the background of Marin's ballet recital picture. Every post is a breathless update. Our Marin just sketched the most incredible charcoal of the harbor, or so proud of Marin for being named most spirited in the sophomore class, or Marin's bake sale for the displaced seagulls was a total triumph. Every word of praise was a brick in the wall between me and them. Every achievement of Marin's, no matter how small, was a feast. My existence was, at best, a utility. I learned my role before I could read. I was the stagehand for the Marin show. At Christmas, I was the one who untangled the 30 pounds of blinking lights and balanced precariously on a chair, tested each bulb. At Thanksgiving, I set the heavy silver, my fingers aching from polishing away the tarnish. At birthday parties, I was the designated photographer. I lived life through a 3-inch viewfinder, framing shot after shot of Marin blowing out candles, Marin opening gifts, Marin surrounded by a sea of laughing, adoring faces. I have thousands of photos documenting every smile my family shared, and I am not in a single one of them. My job was to capture the memory, not to be a part of it. I was the infrastructure, necessary, but invisible. This invisibility was reinforced in countless, tiny ways, sharp as paper cuts. At every holiday meal, there would be a place card at my seat, meticulously calligraphed by my mother. It never once had my name spelled correctly. I was Laura. I was Lauren. One memorable Easter, I was Lorna. It stopped being a mistake and became a statement. I was not distinct enough in their minds to merit the correct 5 letters. My seat was always the same, not at the main table, but at the awkward corner spot, the one wedged between the rattling radiator and the bright red, state-mandated fire extinguisher. It was the seat for the unexpected +1, the afterthought. I ate every holiday meal of my childhood listening to the hiss of the radiator on my left and the hum of conversation, always centered on Marin, drifting over from the warm, well-lit main table. I knew the exact inspection date on that fire extinguisher by heart. It was a more consistent dinner companion than my own father. There was one person who saw me, my grandmother, June Ellery. She was my mother's mother, but she seemed forged from a different element entirely. While our house was cold, filled with the sharp scent of Windex and the visual noise of Marin's awards, Grandma June's house, 5 miles down the coast, was a sanctuary. Her kitchen smelled perpetually of warm cinnamon, melted butter, and the rich, dark aroma of brewing coffee. She was a woman of few words, but her actions were precise. She would see me hovering in the doorway and, without a word, slide a warm molasses cookie onto a plate and push it toward me. She never asked about Marin. She asked about me. "How is that engine schematic coming, Laura? Did you figure out the short in the old radio? What are you reading?" On my 16th birthday, while my parents were busy planning Marin's Sweet 16, which was still 5 months away, Grandma June pressed a heavy, leather-bound journal into my hands. The cover was blank, the paper thick and creamy. "You need to write your own voice, Laura," she said, her grip firm on my wrist. "Write it down before the world writes it for you." I took her words as a lifeline. While Marin practiced her lines for the school play, I taught myself. Our town library was small, the computers ancient, but it had an engineering section that hadn't been updated since the 1990s. I devoured books on electrical circuits. I downloaded corrupted, badly scanned PDF files on C++ and Python, piecing together coding languages from fragmented examples. I used my allowance to buy discarded breadboards and wiring from the town's tiny electronics repair shop. I worked in the attic, the only room that was truly mine, and taught myself how systems work, how to find a broken link, how to bypass a faulty connection, how to build something that worked, quietly and efficiently, in the dark. In my junior year, I entered the state science fair. My project was an ambitious, working model of a coastal wind turbine, designed to be 30% more efficient in capturing the erratic gusts of the Maine shoreline. I had built every piece of it, from the hand-carved balsa wood blades to the coded microcontroller that adjusted their pitch. It won first place. I stood on the gymnasium stage, clutching a blue ribbon and a comically oversized certificate. The principal called my name over the feedback screeching loudspeaker. I looked out at the rows of metal folding chairs. The section reserved for the Schultz family was empty, 3 empty chairs, gleaming under the fluorescent lights. There had been a scheduling conflict. Marin had a rehearsal for a Glee Club regional qualifier. I remember the silence in the car on the way home. My physics teacher, Mr. Henderson, had found me still standing by my project an hour after the gymnasium had cleared out. He drove me home, his old sedan smelling like coffee and sawdust. He didn't try to fill the silence with platitudes. He just drove. When we pulled into my driveway, the house was ablaze with lights, and I could hear the faint sound of Marin practicing her scales. When I walked inside, my ribbon in hand, my mother looked up from the kitchen table, where she was hot-gluing sequins onto one of Marin's costumes. "Oh, good. You're home," she said, not looking at the ribbon. "Listen, Laura, I know you're probably disappointed about the fair, but you have to understand, you are strong. You've always been the strong one. You are strong so Marin can shine." It was the family motto, the one trotted out every time my needs conflicted with Marin's wants. It was meant to sound noble, like a compliment, but it wasn't. It was a chain. It meant my strength was not for me. It was a resource to be consumed by my sister's ambitions. It meant I was the foundation, buried in the dirt, so she could have the view. That night, I went up to the attic. The house was quiet. I opened the leather journal from Grandma June. The pages were still empty, smelling faintly of her cinnamon kitchen. I sat there for a long time, the blue ribbon on the desk beside me. Then, I picked up a pen. The ink scratched against the thick paper, the only sound in the cold room. I wrote my first sentence. "I am here." It was not a plea. It was not a question. It was a fact. It was the first time I had ever stated it as such. A quiet, unshakable seed of silence, finally taking root in the dark. I didn't go to college. My parents had made it clear that any available funds were earmarked for Marin's art history degree, preferably at a private liberal arts school that would look good on a Christmas card. I was the strong one, after all. So, after graduation, while Marin toured campuses in Connecticut, I started working the night shift at the Kilton Bay Logistics Port, just south of Pine Harbor. It was a world of steel, noise, and anonymity. From 11 p.m. to 7 a.m., I was just a number on a high-visibility vest, directing the flow of containers under harsh, sodium-yellow floodlights. The air smelled of diesel exhaust and cold seawater. I was surrounded by men who had worked there for 20 years and kids like me, trying to scrape together enough for community college or just to get out. Nobody cared about my name, my sister, or my high school science fair ribbon. They just cared if I got the manifest right. For the first time in my life, my invisibility felt like an asset. It let me watch. And I watched everything. The port was a living system, a massive, chaotic organism of trucks, ships, and cranes. But after a few months, I saw it wasn't chaos. It was a pattern, the bottlenecks, the pileups at receiving Bay 4. the way the freezer trucks always got stuck waiting for inspections at precisely 3 a.m., it all repeated. The flow of goods in and out of that port was just like the tides I'd grown up with, predictable, cyclical, and governed by rules no one was bothering to write down. I brought in the old, battered laptop I'd saved up for, the one with the flickering screen and the E key you had to punch, during my 30-minute breaks, huddled in a cold utility closet that smelled like floor wax and old raincoats. I started mapping the flow. I didn't have access to their systems, not really, but I had the paper manifests, the radio chatter, and my own eyes. I built a flowchart in a cracked copy of a spreadsheet program. Then I started writing scripts. Simple, ugly code, pulling from the publicly available shipping schedules and the internal manifests I was supposed to be filing. My goal was simple. I wasn't just tracking where things were, I was trying to predict where they would get stuck. It took 6 weeks. 6 weeks of cold coffee, cramped fingers, and my eyes burning from the screen's glow in that dark closet. Then, one Tuesday night, my script spat out a simple alert. Overload, Bay 4, 03:15 a.m., projected. Wait, 90 mins, reroute, Bay 6, 7. At 2:30 a.m., I found my shift supervisor, a grizzled man named Sal, who seemed permanently welded to his clipboard. Sal, I said, Bay 4 is going to jam in 45 minutes. A reefer ship and 3 long hauls are going to hit inspection at the same time. You need to open 6 and 7 now and send the trucks there. He gave me a look that could have curdled milk. Schultz, go back to your station. I've been doing this since you were in diapers. Just check the manifests, I said, holding out my printout. He snatched it, glanced at his own, and his face tightened. He hadn't seen the overlap. He got on his radio, his voice a gravelly bark. Open up bays 6 and 7, all incoming rigs. Divert to 6 and 7 until further notice, and get me inspection teams C and D over there, now. At 3:15 a.m., Bay 4 was clear. The trucks flowed into 6 and 7 like water. There was no jam, no 90-minute delay, nothing. The shift continued, smoother than any I'd ever worked. Sal didn't say a word to me for the rest of the night. I kept running the script. I refined it. The next week, I predicted a forklift scheduling conflict. The week after, a coolant shortage for the freezer units. I wasn't just predicting problems 24 to 48 hours out. I was offering solutions. After a month, Sal pulled me into his office. He had a sheet of paper in his hand. Our error rate, he said, tapping the paper, our overnight shipping errors, misroutes, and spoilage claims, it's down 18% in 1 month. He stared at me, his eyes baffled. The front office thinks I'm a goddamn genius. They think I'm running some new dynamic system. He slid the paper across the desk. This is you, isn't it? That laptop in the closet? I just nodded. I don't know what you're doing, he said, shaking his head. But don't stop. The rumor started small. The Kilton night shift miracle. How Sal's crew was suddenly the most efficient team on the entire New England seaboard. The front office sent down consultants in suits, who watched, took notes, and left, completely misunderstanding what was happening. They saw Sal. They didn't see me. But someone else heard. One night, a tall, older man in a worn wool coat was waiting by my station as the sun came up. He wasn't one of the corporate types. He looked like a retired ship's captain. He watched me sign out, then stepped into my path. You're the girl, he said. It wasn't a question. The one who sees the tide. I tensed, ready to deny everything. My name is Victor Hale, he said, as if that should mean something. I found out later it did. He was the independent logistics consultant, a legend who had redesigned supply chains for entire nations after disasters. He was the man they called when the system truly broke. Sal's a good manager, but he's not a prophet. I've been watching his numbers. They're not just good, they're impossible. He looked at me, his eyes sharp and analytical. How? So I told him, in the cold, gray dawn of the parking lot. I explained the flowcharts, the bottlenecks, the predictive script I'd written. I told him about the tides. He listened for 10 minutes without interrupting. When I finished, he was quiet for a moment. Then he reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a business card. It was thick, cream-colored stock, with just a name and a number, no title. "When you're ready to do this for real," he said, "call me. The world is choking on its own supply lines. Kid, it needs a new system." He turned and walked away before I could even say thank you. I looked at the card. It felt heavier than a piece of paper. That night, I went online at the library. I searched for logistics and systems. I found a tech accelerator program based in Portland, Oregon. It was 3,000 miles away. It was on the other side of the world. They were looking for early-stage companies focused on systemic efficiency and equity. The application was long and complex. It asked for business plans, revenue projections, and team structures, none of which I had. At the very end, there was one essay question, limited to 25 words. "What is your core thesis?" I thought about my seat at the table, by the fire extinguisher. I thought about the empty chairs at the science fair. I thought about the trucks sitting idle at Bay 4 while Bay 6 sat empty. I typed one sentence. Equity can be engineered. I sent it in and forgot about it. 2 weeks later, an email arrived. I had been accepted. More than accepted. I had been awarded a full scholarship, covering all program costs and a stipend for living. I stared at the email for an hour. I had spent my entire life on the outside, building my own ladders. This was the first time someone had ever held a door open for me. It was the first time I was leaving Maine, not because I was running away, but because I was invited to step into something. I packed one suitcase and my laptop. I told my parents I was moving to Oregon for a job. My mother nodded, distracted, already addressing envelopes for Marin's high school graduation announcements. "That's nice, dear," she said. "Send us a postcard." Portland was a shock. It was a city of rain, bridges, and restless energy. The accelerator was an old warehouse, loud and bright, filled with people who talked fast and drew on whiteboards. I was the only one there who hadn't gone to an Ivy League school, the only one who had ever worked a loading dock. And I was the only one who knew, from the ground up, how broken the system was. I found my team in the trenches of that program. Ava was a force of nature, an operations genius who had quit a soul-crushing job at a mega retailer. She saw my flowcharts and, within an hour, had a plan to implement them at scale. Noah was a data scientist, a quiet, methodical brain who saw the beauty in my ugly code. He called it brutally effective and started talking about machine learning and self-healing algorithms. And then there was Pri, a user interface designer who believed that the most complex data in the world was useless if a human couldn't understand it in 5 seconds. We were a team of builders. We were all people who had been overlooked. We needed a name. We sat around a wobbly card table, our first office, eating cheap pizza. "It's about flow," Ava said, "making things move right." "It's about equality," I said, "making the system fair, giving everyone the same access." I looked at the table, at the empty chairs around us, in my family. The table was a closed circle. Every seat claimed. Here, we were starting fresh. "Equiflow," I said. "Equiflow Labs." Pri sketched a logo on a napkin. Not a block, not a wall, a simple silver spiral, constant, efficient, adaptive movement. We built our first product on that ethos. It wasn't just a predictive tool anymore. It was a full dashboard for supply chain management. It didn't just warn you about a problem. It gave you 3 immediate, optimized solutions. It was a system that predicted shortages before they happened and suggested rerouting to prevent them. It was a tool for the sales of the world, giving them the power of a 1,000-person analytics department on a single screen. On the wall of our tiny office, we hung a framed piece of paper. It wasn't a stock certificate or a business license. It was our founding principle, the words that defined what we were building and why. Build the table, add chairs. Our first office was the attic of a pre-war red brick building in the industrial district. It was one large room with slanted ceilings, exposed pipes, and a window air conditioning unit that, when it kicked on, roared like a distressed fishing boat. The rent was cheap, and we knew why. The air was a permanent, layered aroma of instant ramen, stale coffee, and the faint, dusty smell of the microbrewery on the ground floor. Our furniture consisted of the wobbly card table, 4 mismatched folding chairs, and a mountain of servers Noah had built from salvaged parts. Our primary food group was the 30-cent cup noodle. We were, in every sense, a cliché. And we were failing. We pitched to everyone. We took meetings in sleek, glass-walled venture capital offices where our worn sneakers squeaked on the polished concrete floors. We pitched in coffee shops, shouting over the hiss of the espresso machine. We explained Equiflow's mission. We are engineering equity. The VCs stared at us, their faces blank. Equity doesn't scale, one told us, leaning back in a chair that cost more than our entire server setup. It's a wonderful social mission, but it's not a business. Another cut me off mid-sentence. So you're a nonprofit? We are a for-profit technology company, I'd insist, my voice tight. We create efficiency. The equity is the result of the efficiency. The system is broken because it's unfair. We fix the unfairness. We fix the system. They didn't see it. They saw 4 kids in an attic with a niche idea. We were rejected. We were rejected softly. With keep in touch. We were rejected harshly. With this is not a viable market. We were rejected 10 times. On our 11th try, we gave up on venture capital and went straight to the people who were actually bleeding. A small, regional network of 12 rural health clinics. Their supply chain was a nightmare. They were constantly running out of basic, essential items, saline bags, sterile gloves, diabetes test strips. Their purchasing manager, a woman named Diaz, had the most tired eyes I had ever seen. We set up our demo in their windowless conference room. It was our 11th formal demo. I could feel the exhaustion coming off my team in waves. Noah's hands were shaking slightly. Pre's smile was brittle. Look, Diaz said, cutting off my intro. I've had 4 software companies in here this year. They all promise me synergy and optimization. What they deliver is a new password I have to remember. What can you actually do? I deleted the presentation. I pulled up a blank screen and started mapping her actual flow, right there, based on the frantic notes she'd been scribbling. Your problem isn't purchasing, I said. It's distribution. Your 3 largest clinics are hoarding. Your smallest 4 are starving. Your supplier delivers to a central hub, and by the time your smallest clinics get their order, the inventory is already gone. I showed her our interface. Pre had designed it to be as simple as a weather forecast. We don't just track your inventory, I explained. We predict the need, based on historical patient data and even local flu outbreak reports, and we automatically suggest reallocation before a shortage happens. We take the guesswork away from your hub manager and just give them the answer. She stared at the screen for a full minute. You can do that? For real? Let us prove it, I said. No cost for 90 days. If we don't fix it, you pull the plug. No questions. She agreed, not with excitement, with the grim resignation of someone who had nothing left to lose. It can't be any worse than what we have now, she said. That was our first yes, and it was the beginning of hell. Diaz's system wasn't a system. It was a physical manifestation of chaos. It was 3 different, incompatible Excel spreadsheets, a stack of carbon copy paper manifests from a trucking company, and a fax machine that was, I am not joking, still receiving handwritten order forms. The data wasn't just dirty, it was radioactive. We practically moved into their storage basement. For 3 weeks. We didn't go home. We slept on the floor, using rolls of paper towels as pillows, surrounded by cardboard boxes of decade-old invoices. We ate vending machine dinners. Ava, Noah, Pre, and I. We sat side by side, manually entering thousands of lines of data. We weren't just installing software. We were performing a data archaeology, digging through the sediment of years of neglect. Noah wrote scripts that cleaned the data as we entered it. Ava rebuilt their entire workflow process on a whiteboard. Pri sat with the nurses, watching how they actually ordered supplies and redesigned the interface on the fly. We were winning by millimeters. Every cleaned dataset, every linked database, every time the API successfully pulled a number from their ancient server, it was a victory. We were turning a pile of paper into a living, breathing, predictive tool. At the end of the first quarter, I ran the numbers. I checked them 3 times. I called Ava and Noah over. We looked at the screen, too tired to cheer. Supply shortage incidents across all 12 clinics, down 27%. Critical items, like test strips and asthma inhalers, stockouts down by 40%. I sent the one-page report to Diaz and the network's CFO. I was expecting a meeting, a call, maybe even a thank you. An hour later, an email came from the CFO. It contained one word: continue. I printed that email and taped it to the wall of our attic, right next to the roaring air conditioner. It was the most beautiful word I had ever read. A small healthcare industry journal, the kind of magazine you only find in hospital waiting rooms, got wind of our pilot program. The reporter who called seemed to get it in a way the VCs never had. The article that came out was small, buried on page 14, but the headline was perfect. EquiFlow Labs, a thinking EKG for the rural supply chain. It wasn't flashy, but it was right. It said we were listening to the heartbeat of the system. That article landed on the desk of Victor Hale. He didn't call. He just showed up at our attic one rainy Tuesday. He walked in, water dripping from his old wool coat, and surveyed the room. He looked at the server rack, the mountain of instant noodle cups, and the continue email taped to the wall. A thinking EKG, he said, his voice a low rumble. I like that. He didn't sit in one of our folding chairs. He perched on a stack of empty server boxes. We didn't pitch him. We just showed him the data. We showed him the raw numbers from the clinics. He listened for an hour, asking sharp, precise questions. What's your burn rate? He finally asked. $6,000 a month, mostly for the servers, I said. We're not taking salaries. He nodded, as if that was the only acceptable answer. The clinic is a good start, but it's sentimental. Can your system handle something with no sentiment at all? Something brutal? Try us, Ava said, crossing her arms. He pulled a checkbook from his coat. He wrote a check for $90,000 and tore it out. He slid it across the card table. This is your angel round, he said. It's not a gift. It's a test. I'm introducing you to the procurement head at Cascadia Foods. They're a regional grocery chain. Their standards are impossible. Their margins are thinner than paper, and they will fire you if you're late by 1 hour. Stop talking about ethics. Stop talking about equity. Prove it. Prove that your system makes them more money. Prove that it's more profitable to be efficient and fair than it is to be greedy and wasteful. That is the only sermon anyone in this business will ever listen to. The grocery contract was a different kind of war. The data was faster, the variables more complex. It wasn't just about supply, it was about spoilage. A box of gloves can sit on a shelf for a year. A crate of lettuce lasts 3 days. Our system had to learn a new rhythm. Noah and I barely slept, re-architecting the predictive models. But Victor was right. The system was brutal, but it was honest. The data didn't lie, and our code, built on the premise of a balanced, efficient flow, began to find its beat. With the clinic data, the new grocery contract, and Victor's $90,000 stamp of approval, we were suddenly interesting. We were invited to a small, local tech demo day. It was our first time presenting to a real crowd. Pri set up the stage, a podium, a screen, and 4 chairs for our team. But I stopped her. Just 1 chair, I said. For me. But the whole team should be up there, she protested. No, I said. They'll be in the front row. But on stage, I want 1 chair for me and 1 empty one right next to it. I gave my presentation. I told the story of the clinics. I talked about the data. The whole time, this empty folding chair sat beside me. During the Q&A, a man in the back raised his hand. Great presentation, but I gotta ask, What's with the empty chair? Was your co-founder sick? I looked at the chair. That's the family and friends seat, I said, my voice even. It's for all the people who are supposed to show up for you. I just find it's more efficient to budget for the space. A few people laughed nervously, but someone in the front row took a picture. Me, small, under the bright lights, sitting next to a stark, empty chair. The photo circulated in the small Portland tech community. It became a weird, minor symbol for the grind, for the isolation of the startup life. It was the chair I had stopped waiting for anyone to fill. The buzz from that demo, combined with our rapidly improving metrics from the grocery pilot, was enough. We closed our seed round. It wasn't a massive number, but it was real. It was enough to move out of the attic. It was enough for salaries. The team was ecstatic. They made a list. New computers, ergonomic chairs, an office with an elevator, a cappuccino machine. I vetoed all of it. Not yet, I said. We're still lean. Laura, we're not lean. We're destitute, Pri argued. We deserve a decent chair. We can buy one thing, I said, finally relenting. One, what do we need most? We stared at the wobbly card table that had been our entire world. A table, Noah said, his voice quiet. A real one, big enough for all of us, and for the people who come next. It was the only purchase I approved. We found a local woodworker and commissioned a single, massive table made of reclaimed Douglas fir. It was simple, solid, and beautiful. It filled the center of our new, slightly less dilapidated office. For our first official meeting in the new space, we still drank cheap coffee, but it was in real ceramic mugs. As we sat down, I placed something in the center of the vast, wooden surface. It was my grandmother's leather journal. I opened it to the first page. The ink now faded slightly. I am here. And just below it, the words I had added myself, the ones she had spoken to me in her cinnamon-scented kitchen. You can still shine when no one claps. We were running on 2 successful, high-performing pilot programs. Our seed money was in the bank. We had a solid team and a real functioning product, and then the world broke. It didn't happen all at once. It was a series of cascading, unrelated events, a dockworkers' strike in Singapore, a snap freeze in Central California, a new tariff on imported aluminum, a sudden, unexplained spike in demand for vinyl gloves. Individually, they were just news headlines. Collectively, they were a tidal wave that crashed over the global supply chain, and our system, our beautiful, predictive system, went blind overnight. Our models were built on history. They were designed to see the patterns, the echoes, the rhythms of a world that behaved in a way it had always behaved, but the world had just thrown the rulebook into a bonfire. History was no longer a reliable guide. Our system started issuing alerts that were useless. It predicted shortages that never came, and completely missed the ones that were crippling our clients. The metrics from the grocery chain pilot, our pride and joy, turned blood red. Spoilage rates weren't just creeping up, they were skyrocketing. Our 27% reduction in hospital shortages evaporated. We were back to zero, worse than zero, because now they were relying on a tool that was actively lying to them. We gathered around the big wooden table, the team I had built, and the mood was funereal. Ava, our operations rock, looked pale. Noah, my data prophet, hadn't spoken in an hour, just staring at a screen of incomprehensible, jagged graphs. It's not the code, Noah said finally, his voice hoarse. The architecture is sound. It's the premise. The data is telling us what happened yesterday. But yesterday doesn't matter anymore. The present is deviating from the past faster than we can model it. So we're done, Ava said flatly. Our thinking EKG has no pulse. The VCs will find out in a week when we file our reports, and they'll claw back everything. No, I said. The word came out sharper, colder than I intended. Everyone looked at me. The old, familiar chill of the attic, of the seat by the fire extinguisher, settled over me. This was just a different kind of empty chair, a different kind of failure. We're not done, I said. Standing up, I walked to the whiteboard. We're not building it wrong. We're building the wrong thing. I erased our entire workflow diagram. Ava winced as if I'd slapped her. We're trying to be fortune tellers, I said. We're trying to predict the future based on the past. That's what everyone does. And it just failed. The future is no longer predictable. I drew a single, simple box on the board. So we stop predicting. We start adapting. We stop trying to guess what will happen in 2 weeks. We build a system that can react perfectly to what is happening in the next 2 seconds. Noah looked up, a spark of understanding in his eyes. Not predictive, he murmured. Adaptive, self-correcting, based on real-time signals. Exactly, I said. Forget the annual forecasts. Forget the quarterly trends. I want a system that ingests now. I want it to read the ship manifests as they're updated, the truck locations from live GPS, the point-of-sale data from the cash register, the local weather report, the social media chatter about a new flu outbreak, all of it, at once. That's not a data pipeline, Laura, Ava said, her voice strained. That's a fire hose. You're talking about petabytes of data. Live. We don't have the infrastructure. Then we build it, I said. Noah, can you rewrite the architecture? Can you build a model that doesn't just learn from the past, but actively recalibrates itself based on the present? A model that thrives on volatility instead of being broken by it? Noah was quiet for a long time, his fingers tracing patterns on the table. It's a complete teardown, he said. Everything we've built, we'd have to start the machine learning from scratch. But, yes, theoretically, it could be done. It would be beautiful. Ava, I turned to her. Can you build the pipeline to feed that machine? Can you get us the data, all of it, in real time? Ava, who had looked defeated moments before, suddenly straightened. She was an operations specialist. This was a logistics problem from hell. It was the kind of challenge she was born for. If they have a signal, I can get it, she said, a grim smile on her face. It'll be ugly. It'll mean breaking contracts and begging for API access we don't deserve. But I can get it. And I looked at our designer, who seemed terrified by the engineering jargon. Your job is the hardest of all. This new system is going to be infinitely more complex. It's going to be a roaring engine of chaos under the hood. You have to make it look breathable. You have to make it simple. A user needs to look at this storm of data and feel calm. They need to see one button, one number, one green arrow that says, do this. You have to translate the chaos into confidence. Nodded, her knuckles white. Make it breathable. I can do that. This is our pivot, I said, looking at each of them. We're not a predictive analytics company anymore. We are an adaptive intelligence firm. We are no longer selling a forecast. We are selling a reflex, the fastest, smartest reflex on the market. Now, let's get to work. The next 4 months were the purest, most focused form of hell I have ever experienced. We burned through our seed money at a terrifying rate, buying server capacity. We lived at the office, sleeping in shifts on beanbag chairs. Noah rebuilt our entire core architecture, his corner of the office disappearing behind a wall of whiteboards covered in equations that looked like a new language. Ava was a demon on the phone, negotiating, threatening, and charming her way into data streams we had no right to access. She convinced trucking conglomerates to give us their live GPS feeds. She found a satellite imaging company to sell us real-time parking lot density data from retail centers. And she was our shield. She took the terrifying, complex outputs from Noah's new engine and turned them into art. She designed a dashboard that didn't just show data. It told a story. The interface was clean, minimalist, and centered on a single, dynamic flow score. All the complexity was hidden. All the user saw was a simple, color-coded map and a set of prioritized, actionable instructions. It was, as she had promised, breathable. We went back to our 2 pilot clients, Cascadia Foods and the Rural Hospital Network. We didn't ask for permission. We just push the update. This is Equiflow 2.0. I told Diaz at the hospital network. Stop looking at your monthly order forms. Just look at the dashboard once a day. Do what it says. The first week, the results were shaky. The new model was learning, twitching like a newborn. Then, in the second week, it locked on. The Cascadia Foods pilot was the first to report. Their spoilage rate, which had climbed to catastrophic levels, didn't just stabilize, it plummeted. Our old model had reduced waste. The new one was eliminating it. It was rerouting trucks mid-journey based on a sudden temperature drop in one region. It was automatically cross-leveling inventory between stores in the same city, based on real-time checkout data. The final report from the pilot came in. Spoilage down by 35% from the original baseline. Shelf stock levels up by 22%. They weren't just saving lettuce, they were selling more, because the product was always exactly where it needed to be. The hospital network was even more staggering. We had integrated NOAA's new model with public health data streams. In the third week of the new pilot, our system fired off an alert to Diaz and the network's CFO. Unusual cluster. Influenza-like symptoms, Pine County. Projected surge. 10 days. Recommend immediate reallocation of ICU ventilatory supplies from coastal clinics. It was 10 days before the state's own Department of Health issued a public warning. By that time, Diaz had already followed our system's instructions. The supplies were moved. The rural ICU, which would have been overwhelmed, held. Our system hadn't just predicted the flu. It had seen the first, faint tremors of it in pharmacy sales data and school absence reports. And it had acted. It had given them a 10-day head start. We didn't celebrate, not at first. We were too tired. I printed the graphs from both pilots. The steep, beautiful downward curve of the spoilage. The sharp, upward spike of the ICU supply readiness. Before the public spike in flu cases, I printed them on our large format plotter, sheet after sheet, and taped them to the longest wall in our office. The four of us, me, Noah, Ava, and Pri, stood in front of that wall. We didn't talk. We just stood there for maybe 5 minutes, looking at the data. It was like a religious service. We were paying our respects to the truth. We had listened to the chaos, and it had given us the answer. The rest happened fast. The buzz around our adaptive model was electric. We weren't a nice-to-have social mission anymore. We were a must-have survival tool. And then we got the call. Orion Freightworks, the 800-pound gorilla, a multi-continental logistics corporation whose annual revenue was larger than the GDP of a small country. They didn't ask for a demo. They demanded a meeting. Their CEO flew to Portland. He sat at our reclaimed wood table, looking completely out of place in his $1,000 suit. He didn't care about our story or our mission. He had seen the data from the Cascadia pilot. "We move 5 million containers a year," he said, his voice flat. "Every hour one of them sits idle. I lose money. Your system stops them from sitting idle. I want it." He didn't want a pilot. He didn't want to be a client. He made a proposal that sucked the air out of the room. A 5-year exclusive license for the entire global freight sector. They would pay an astronomical sum, enough to make us all wealthy overnight. But in exchange, none of their competitors could ever use Equiflow. It was the golden handcuffs. It was the devil's bargain. It would make us rich, but it would chain our mission to a single, monolithic company. We negotiated for 3 weeks. Ava and I were brutal. We were not going to be a vendor. We were not going to be acquired. We would be a partner. The night we signed the contract, it was pouring rain in Portland. The drops hammered against the glass of our conference room windows. The CEO of Orion was there, along with a team of lawyers. Our team was there. Victor Hale had flown in, standing quietly in the corner, watching me. The final contract was slid in front of me. I read the key clause aloud, my voice cutting through the sound of the storm. Orion Freightworks shall be designated the preferred priority partner for maritime and freight logistics, and Equiflow Labs shall ensure. I paused, looking up at the CEO. He met my gaze. He knew what I was emphasizing. Partner, not acquisition, not tool. Partner. I signed my name. The news broke the next day. A major financial paper ran a story on the deal, and the headline made me smile. It didn't call us a unicorn. It didn't call us a disruptor. It called Equiflow the flexible spine of the new supply chain. It was perfect. We weren't the brain. We weren't the muscle. We were the spine. The central, adaptive, flexible structure that allowed the entire body to move, react, and bend without breaking. Our Series C funding round closed 2 days later. It was oversubscribed in an hour. The valuation was staggering. The numbers had so many zeros. They looked fake. My phone rang that night. It was an unsaved number, but I knew who it was. I picked up. Hello, Victor? I heard his low rumble on the other end. He wasn't congratulating me. He wasn't talking about the money. You did it, kid, he said. The map is wrong this morning. All the old shipping lanes, all the old supply routes, they're obsolete. You just changed the map. The Series C money was rocket fuel. It changed our valuation, our resources, and our public profile. But it didn't change our mission. It just gave me the capital to execute the other half of it. While the finance world was buzzing about our deal with Orion, I was quietly liquidating a small, legally mandated portion of my own shares in a secondary sale. It was a formality of the round. When the transaction cleared, my personal bank account, which had never held more than a few $1,000s, suddenly contained a number that felt abstract, almost meaningless. My on-paper net worth, tied up in the fluctuating value of Equiflow, was now estimated to be north of $200 million. I stared at the number on my banking app. It was just digits. It didn't feel like a victory. It felt like a tool, a very, very large tool. I didn't buy a house. I didn't buy a car. I didn't even buy a new coat, though the Portland rain was already soaking through the sleeve of my old one. Instead, I made a series of quiet phone calls to a law firm specializing in philanthropy. 3 weeks later, the June Ellery Fund was incorporated. Its mission was simple, pulled straight from my grandmother's kitchen: educational equity and nutritional stability for small New England towns, the ones everyone forgets, the ones like Pine Harbor. There was no press release. There was no announcement on our company website. I used a portion of the secondary sale proceeds to buy an old, defunct fish cannery on the edge of the water, not 5 miles from my parents' house. It was a cold, cavernous building that smelled of rust and old brine. It was perfect. I put Ava in charge of the side project. I want a food hub, I told her. But I want it to run on Equiflow. I want every school, every food pantry, every church basement in a 50-mile radius to be a node in our system. This was not charity in the traditional sense. It was not about dropping off boxes of canned goods and feeling good about it. This was about applying our core principle. We used the Equiflow adaptive engine to tap into the supply chains of the regional grocery stores, our clients, and identify their surplus, not their garbage, not their expired products, but their surplus. The lettuce that was perfectly good, but cosmetically imperfect, the milk that was a week from its sell-by date, the pallet of yogurt that was over-ordered. Our system identified this surplus in real time, and the June Ellery Fund's single, refrigerated truck, driven by a local I'd hired away from the Kilton docks, would pick it up. The hub, that old cannery, became a distribution point. The system would tell the driver, based on real-time need from the shelters and pantries, exactly where to go. No waste, no bottlenecks, no one hoarding, no one starving. It was the rural clinic pilot, perfected and aimed at hunger. I flew back to Maine for the opening. I didn't tell my parents I was in town. I went to the cannery. The team had cleaned it, painted the floors, and installed shelves and freezers. The only new addition I had commissioned was a simple, carved wooden sign that hung over the main door. It just said, "The June Ellery Food Hub." There were no ribbons to cut. There was no mayor. There was just me, the driver, and the first shipment of fresh milk being logged into our system. I ran my hand over the carved letters of her name. This was the applause she never got. This was the chair I was adding to her table. Back in Portland, the team was adjusting to our new reality. We were no longer 4 kids in an attic. We had 80 employees. We were a unicorn. The label felt strange, mythological, and completely detached from the reality of our work. Pri, who had developed a sleek, confident style, cornered me by the coffee machine. "Laura," she said, a mischievous look in her eye, "you are officially one of the wealthiest women in tech. That tote bag has a hole in it. Your canvas shoes are, I think, dissolving. Don't you think it's time to hire a stylist?" I looked down at my scratched bag, the one I'd carried since the accelerator. "It's fine," I laughed. "It holds my laptop. Besides, I know what I'm wearing." My life didn't change. I kept my small, one-bedroom apartment overlooking the Willamette River. I liked the view of the water. It reminded me of the tides. I still walked to work. The money wasn't for me. It was for Equiflow. It was for the fund. It was leverage. A way to move a larger lever. To build a bigger table. I had spent so long being invisible that I had no real desire to be seen. I just wanted to build. We celebrated our new unicorn status. The team expected, I think, a lavish party, champagne, something worthy of our new valuation. I ordered 20 pizzas to the office on a Friday afternoon. They arrived cold. The delivery driver had gotten stuck in traffic. We ate them anyway, standing around the big wooden table. "To the cold pizza," Noah said, raising a slice. "May we always remember being hungry." It became our tradition. Every major win, every new funding round, every impossible contract signed. We ordered cold pizza. It was our way of staying grounded. It was our reminder of the attic, of the hunger, of the days when continue paix was the only victory we had. The June Ellery Fund was running for 2 months before the first letter arrived. It wasn't from a board member or a politician. It was from a high school girl in a town I'd never heard of in northern Maine. The fund had established a small scholarship, the Ellery Grant, for girls pursuing STEM fields from underfunded high schools. She was the first recipient. Her letter was handwritten on lined notebook paper. It wasn't a formal thank you. It was a confession. "I've been teaching myself code in the library, just like the application essay asked about," she wrote. "My parents don't get it. My teachers told me to focus on more realistic jobs. I've never met a female engineer. I was going to quit. I thought I was the only one. Thank you for believing in invisible girls." I read the letter standing in my quiet apartment, the lights of the city reflecting in the river. Thank you for believing in invisible girls. I had to sit down. My hands were shaking. I had spent my whole life feeling like a ghost in my own home, a Lorna at my own table. I found a piece of Equiflow stationery. I wrote back to her. My message was short. "I see you. Your voice is yours. Now, go build your table. And when you do, make sure to add chairs for those who come after you." That evening, I was scrolling through my phone. It was an old habit, one I couldn't break. I'd scroll to the S section of my contacts. "Mom," it read, and just below it, "Dad." The entries were pristine. No call history, no recent texts, just the cold, digital evidence of their existence. The silence from Pine Harbor was total. They had not called when the Orion deal was announced. They had not called when the local Maine paper ran a tiny syndicated story about a former residence company funding a new food hub. For the first time, I realized the silence no longer hurt. The ache, the sharp, acidic sting of being forgotten, was gone. I was no longer that girl on the stage, staring at 3 empty chairs. I was in a room I had built, surrounded by people who had chosen to be there. The silence didn't hurt, but it was still there. It was a weight, a void. It was a fact, like gravity. It was the quiet, heavy space in my life that I had finally, fully built around. It came, as it always did, on the night before Thanksgiving. A text message on my phone, which had been buzzing all day with venture capitalists and board members about our Q4 projections. Amid the noise, a single notification from Mom. "Thanksgiving dinner at 6. Stop by if you're free." Not, "We miss you." Not, "We hope you can make it." Not even, Are you coming home? Just an optional appointment, slotted in case my schedule allowed. The same text she would send a neighbor or a distant cousin. I stared at the words. If you're free. I was the CEO of a multi-million-dollar corporation, an entity that was actively reshaping the logistics of the entire continent. I was never free. But this year was different. I was different. The void they had cultivated in me no longer ached. It was a space I now owned. I typed back one word. Okay. I flew into Portland, Maine, not Portland, Oregon. The air was different, colder, sharper, carrying the unmistakable scent of salt and dormant pine. It was the air of my childhood, the air I had learned to breathe while holding my breath. I rented a car, a generic sedan, and drove the familiar route, the gray ocean on my right. I didn't go to a florist. I pulled the car over on a back road, the one Grandma June used to take. Even in the cold of late November, there were clusters of hardy wild asters and Queen Anne's lace, brittle and brown at the edges but still standing. They were weeds, technically, resilient, stubborn. I cut a small, sharp bouquet with the shears from the rental's emergency kit. They were her flowers. Then I stopped at a stationery store. I bought a single, thick, cream-colored place card and a matching envelope. In the car, I used my favorite pen, the one I'd signed the Orion contract with, and wrote 3 words on the card. For who shows up? I slipped it into my coat pocket. This was my contribution to the table. I arrived at 6 o'clock precisely. The house was blazing with light, every window a warm golden square against the deep blue twilight. I could hear the high, familiar cadence of Marin's laughter before I even opened the door. I let myself in. The hallway was warm, smelling of roasted turkey, sage, and my mother's expensive perfume. The performance was already in full swing. "Laura, you made it!" my mother trilled, brushing her cheek past mine in a cloud of Chanel. Her eyes were already scanning over my shoulder, back toward the dining room. Come in. We're just sitting down." The dining room table was, as always, a masterpiece of feigned perfection. The good silver gleamed, the crystal sparkled, candles were lit. It was a stage set for a family that loved each other loudly. And there, at the corner, wedged between the roaring fireplace and the wall, was my seat. It was the adult version of the kids' table, a strategic placement for the person who didn't fit the arrangement. And on the table, next to the plate, was my mother's place card, her elegant script, a familiar, tiny sting. "Lara." I looked at it. After all these years, she still hadn't learned to spell my name. Or perhaps she had chosen not to. I left the card where it was. I sat down. The heat from the fireplace was already searing the left side of my face. I was, as always, in the shadow. "Marin, darling, tell Uncle Frank about Charleston," my mother prompted, settling herself at the opposite end. "He's dying to hear." "Oh, it's just exploding," Marin said, her hands fluttering like doves. She was wearing a complicated silk dress that probably cost 2 months of my old port salary. "The city just has this energy, you know? My little shop is doing incredibly. We're not just a store, we're a concept. We're called Tidal. We curate artisanal driftwood and sea glass sculptures. People are desperate for that kind of authenticity." "How wonderful," my aunt gushed. "Driftwood," my father boomed, beaming. "That's my girl, always finding value where no one else sees it." I felt a smile, small and sharp, touch my own lips. Value where no one else sees it. The irony was thick enough to carve. The whole table was vibrating. Their attention focused on Marin like a spotlight. They were a closed circuit, and I was the disconnected wire. My father stood up to carve the turkey. He was a man who loved the ceremony of it. He sharpened the knife, enjoying the sound of the steel. He glanced in my general direction, his eyes already on the golden-brown skin of the bird. "So, Laura," he said, the carving fork poised. "You're still out in the Northwest, right? Working on those computers?" "Computers?" The word hung in the air. He said it as if I were in a college dorm, tinkering with a hobby. He said it as if the June Ellery food hub, with its fleet of trucks bearing my silver spiral logo, wasn't operating less than 10 miles from his own house. He said it as if the Orion deal hadn't been mentioned, however briefly, on the National Business Wire. He hadn't seen it, or more likely, he had seen it and could not process it. It did not fit the narrative. I was Lara. I was the strong one. I was the stagehand. I didn't answer him. Instead, I reached for the small, wiry bouquet of wild asters I had placed by my feet. The fireplace was too hot. The empty chair beside me, the one separating me from the wall, was the one that used to hold the fire extinguisher. I deliberately, slowly, placed the bouquet of dried, stubborn flowers on the seat of that empty chair. It was a small, quiet movement, but it broke the rhythm of the room. The chatter stopped. My father's knife paused. "What's that, dear?" my mother asked, her hostess' smile tightening. "Just put them on the sideboard." "No," I said, my voice quiet but clear. It cut through the warmth. "This spot is mine." I nudged the chair, with its offering of weeds, a few inches closer to me. I was claiming the empty space. I was filling it myself, with the memory of the one person who had seen me. My mother's face flushed. She was embarrassed. This was not part of the script. She leaned toward me, her voice a sharp whisper, meant only for me, but loud in the sudden silence. "Laura, honestly, if you had just told me you were coming, I would have saved you a better seat. You didn't have to take that one." I looked at her. I looked at her perfect table, her perfect daughter, and her perfect, profound misunderstanding. She thought the problem was the chair. "I know," I said, smiling faintly. "I chose this one." I picked up my fork. The silence that followed was a different kind. It was awkward, confused. My answer was in a language they didn't speak. My father cleared his throat, plunged the fork into the turkey, and made the first cut. "Anyway, Marin," my aunt said, her voice artificially bright, "tell us more about this curated wood. Does it come in different colors?" The spotlight snapped back. The closed circuit reformed. The energy flowed back to Marin, away from the anomaly in the corner. I was invisible again. The vacuum had sealed itself. I ate my dinner. I listened to the hiss of the fireplace. I ate the dry turkey and the oversweetened cranberries. I was not angry. I was not hurt. I was just observing. I was a scientist, confirming a hypothesis. The system was stable. The variables were unchanged. My mother brought out the dessert, pumpkin pie, her specialty. She served everyone, sliding a slice in front of me last, with a tight, disapproving little smile. As they all dug in, their laughter and conversation resuming its comfortable, exclusive rhythm, I reached into my coat pocket. I pulled out the crisp, cream-colored place card. "For who shows up?" I turned it around, so the 3 words faced the table. I placed it directly on top of my mother's Lara card, covering it completely. I stood up. My chair scraped, just slightly, on the hardwood floor, but no one heard it. Marin was telling an animated story about a misunderstanding with a supplier in Charleston. My father was laughing. My mother was watching Marin, her face glowing with adoration. I walked out of the dining room. I walked down the warm hallway, past the photos of Marin's ballet recitals and Marin's graduation. I let myself out the front door, into the sharp, clean, cold Maine night. I didn't look back. No one had even noticed I was gone. I didn't go far. I spent the night at the rusted-out, single-story motel on Route 1. The one we all used to joke was only for fugitives and adulterers. The sheets were thin and smelled of industrial bleach. I slept for 3 hours, woke up, and worked, using my phone as a hotspot. I approved a new server cluster in Frankfurt and finalized a logistics brief for the Singapore port. As the sun came up, I paid in cash and walked back. I knew the protocol. Thanksgiving night was the performance. The Friday brunch was the real event. It was the informal, mandatory gathering where the family sat around, ate the congealed remains of the feast, and re-established the pecking order in the harsh light of day. My silent departure last night would be hanging in the air, an act of social defiance that required an explanation, or at least, an apology. I walked into the kitchen at 10 a.m. They were all there, my father, my mother, Marin, Uncle Frank, and my aunt. The room was bright with morning sun, which was unkind to the platters of leftover food. The turkey carcass sat on the counter, a picked-over skeleton. "Well, look who it is," my mother said, her voice brittle with false brightness. "You just vanished last night. Laura, we were worried." "I was tired," I said, pouring myself a cup of coffee. I leaned against the counter. I would not be sitting at the corner seat. I would not be sitting at all. "Just tired?" she pressed, her smile not reaching her eyes. She needed a better excuse, something that would absolve her of my rudeness. "Yes, just tired." Uncle Frank, a man whose entire personality was a shade too loud, slapped his hand on the table. "Laura, back for round 2, eh? Had to sleep off the big city excitement?" He was trying to be jovial, to pull the room back into its comfortable shape. "So, tell me, you still doing that computer thing up in Boston?" Boston, not Oregon, not even the right state. After all these years. Before I could form a response, Marin laughed. It was a light, tinkling sound, like wind chimes, and just as empty. She waved her hand dismissively, the one with the new, enormous sapphire ring. "Oh, Uncle Frank, she's not in Boston. She's in Oregon. It's practically Canada." She turned to him, her voice conspiratorial, designed for the whole room to hear. She was smoothing things over. She was putting me back in my box. "She has a little startup, one of those tiny internet things. It keeps her so busy, and she gets, well, she tapped her temple. "A bit overwhelmed. You know how artistic types are, all that passion, not a lot of structure." She smiled at me. It was a kind, sisterly, deeply pitying smile. The sun to the shadow. "We're just glad you got some rest." "Right. Mom? We were worried you were having another one of your episodes." Silence. Even my uncle looked uncomfortable. Artistic type, overwhelmed, episodes. She had just summarized my entire existence in their narrative. A fragile, unstable, unsuccessful dreamer. I didn't look at her. I didn't look at any of them. I was holding the coffee mug. I set it down on the granite countertop. The silence in the kitchen was soft, filled with the hum of the refrigerator. I picked up a teaspoon. I tapped it, once, against the side of my ceramic mug. Ting. It was not a loud sound, but in that room, it was a gunshot. Every head snapped toward me. The chatter stopped. My father, who had just picked up the carving knife to dismantle the rest of the turkey, froze. His hand, holding the knife, remained suspended in the air. My mother, who had been smiling encouragingly at Marin, looked at me. Her smile was gone. I looked at my father's frozen hand, then at my mother, then at Marin. My voice was not angry. It was not loud. It was flat. It was informational. "We just closed our Series C funding round." Blank stares. The words meant nothing to them. They were just computers. My uncle cleared his throat, trying to regain control. "Series C? What's that? A new kind of laptop?" I smiled. A small, thin smile. "No, Uncle Frank, it's a stage of venture capital financing. Our total capital raised, as of this quarter, is just over $200 million. The word dollars dropped into the room like a block of ice. No one moved. My father's hand was still in the air, clutching the knife. He wasn't even blinking. My mother's mouth was slightly open. Marin's condescending smile was frozen on her face, the color draining from her cheeks. The only sound in the entire house was the heavy, rhythmic talk, of the grandfather clock in the hallway, each tick sounding like a hammer blow. The silence was thick, heavy, and absolute. It was the sound of an entire reality fracturing. I let the silence stretch, filling every corner of the bright, sunny kitchen. I let it settle on them, a weight they had never been asked to carry. I decided to continue. I was, after all, just providing information. I'm actually surprised you haven't seen the trucks, I said, my voice still conversational. The ones for the foundation. My mother's eyes finally blinked. She looked at me, her expression unreadable. The foundation? Yes, the June Ellery Fund. My mother's hand, the one that wasn't holding a coffee cup, went to her throat. She knew that name. It's been operating in the county for, 3-4 months now? I continued, as if discussing the weather. The trucks with the silver spiral logo on the side, that's the Equiflow logo. They're stocking all the local food pantries, the shelter in Rockland, even the church basement here in Pine Harbor. They're running our adaptive system. I assumed you would have seen them. The cannery, the local paper, the name. My mother's face was white. Her voice was a whisper, a thread of sound in the terrible, vast silence. The June Ellery Fund? The one in the old cannery building? That's... She couldn't finish. She was staring at me as if I were a ghost. That's yours? I looked at her. It's mine, I said, and it's Grandma June's. It was my father who finally moved. His hand came down, slowly. He placed the carving knife on the counter with a heavy, deliberate clack. The sound made my mother flinch. He turned his whole body to face me. His performer's voice was gone. The loud, jovial, paternal mask had disintegrated. His eyes were sharp, analytical, and for the first time in my life, they were focused entirely on me. He used my correct name. Laura, he said, his voice low and raw. How much of this do you own? It was the only question he had, the only metric he understood. Not, what have you built? Not, how does it work? Not, why did you name it after her? Just, how much? I didn't pause. I didn't need to. I tilted my head, as if I were calculating a grocery bill. The valuation changes, of course, especially after the Orion partnership, I said, my voice casual. But my personal stake, on paper, it's about $200 million, give or take, depends on the week. No one breathed. I am certain of it. The air in the room was static. The ticking of the clock seemed to stop. My uncle's face was a mottled, unhealthy red. Marin's, a sickly, pale gray. My mother looked like she was going to be sick. My father just stared at me, his face utterly, completely blank. The system had crashed. The stagehand had just walked to the center of the stage, turned on all the lights, and burned the set to the ground. I had spent my entire life as a ghost in this house. Now, I was the only solid thing in the room. I looked around at their frozen, shattered faces. I looked at the congealed food. I looked at the half-carved turkey. And then I smiled. It was a bright, polite, helpful smile, the one I used to use when I refilled their wine glasses. More pumpkin pie, anyone? The spell broke. It was a detonation of motion. My mother gasped, a tiny, strangled sound, and lunged for the pie. Yes, pie. Oh, heavens, more pie. What a good idea. Uncle Frank cleared his throat, a sound like gravel in a blender. Well, goodness, 200 million. My. Marin suddenly found her voice. I need some water. Is it hot in here? Mom, it's so hot. My father didn't move. He just continued to stare at me, his eyes wide, his world tilted 90 degrees off its axis. They all started talking at once, a frantic, high-pitched babble. They talked about the pie. They talked about the weather. They talked about how cold the night had been. They talked about anything, except the $200 million bomb that had just vaporized the entire foundation of their lives. They were scrambling, desperately, to put the set back together, but the axis of our world had just shifted, permanently, and it had made no sound at all, except for a ting on a coffee cup. The frantic, pointless chatter died as soon as the kitchen door clicked shut. My aunt and uncle had practically sprinted from the house, their faces pale, muttering thin excuses about an appointment they had just remembered. The performance was over. The audience had fled. We were left behind in the wreckage, the four of us, the original solar system, its sun just extinguished. The kitchen, which minutes before had been filled with a high-pitched, desperate energy, was now submerged in a silence so profound it felt like deep water. It was broken only by the talk of the hallway clock, measuring out a new, terrifying timeline. My mother, my father, and my sister were statues. Marin was frozen at the table, her hands clenched in her lap. My father stood by the counter, his knuckles white on the carving knife he hadn't yet released. My mother, nearest the sink, looked as if she had seen a ghost. Not just a ghost, but the ghost of her entire, carefully constructed life. My words still hung in the air. $200 million. My mother was the first to move. She was a creature of habit, and in a crisis, she reverted to her programming. She began to clean. It was a jerky, convulsive movement. She grabbed my uncle's half-eaten plate of pie and slammed it into the sink. The clatter of the ceramic on the stainless steel was a gunshot. She turned on the water, a hard, pressurized stream, and began scrubbing the plate with a ferocity that was frightening. She was scrubbing away the evidence. She was trying to scrub away the last 5 minutes. I remained where I was, leaning against the far counter, my empty coffee mug in my hand. I hadn't moved. I was the anchor point. They were the ones adrift. She spoke, her back to me. Her voice was thin, strained, and high, stretched over the sound of the running water. "You should have told us, Laura." It was an accusation, the classic reflexive misdirection. "Told you what?" I asked, my voice calm. "This, all of this, the money, the company." She scrubbed harder, her shoulders rigid. Why would you hide that from us? Why would you let us? She couldn't say look like fools. "Why didn't you say something?" she finally choked out. She turned off the water, grabbing a dish towel. "My heavens, Laura, what must people think? They'll think we're horrible parents. They'll think we weren't supportive." There it was, not, "Why didn't you share your struggle?" Not, "Why didn't you let us be proud of you?" But, "What will people think?" The stage performance was all that mattered. "I did tell you," I said. My voice, quiet and flat, cut through the kitchen. She stopped wiping the plate. "I told you," I repeated. "For 20 years. I told you when I won the state science fair and you didn't come. I told you when I got a full scholarship to the accelerator program in Oregon. You said, 'That's nice, dear. Send a postcard.' I told you every time I came home and sat at that corner table, spelled Laura or Lorna. I told you last night, when I walked out of that dining room, and not a single person at that table even noticed I was gone." I took a breath. "I have been shouting at the top of my lungs for my entire life. The problem isn't that I didn't tell you. The problem is that you were never, not once, listening." The dish towel fell from her hand into the soapy water. She looked at me. Really looked at me. Her face was a mask of confusion and a terrible, dawning horror. She had been confronted with a truth so total, so undeniable, that her defenses had no words for it. The silence that followed was different. It was heavy, weighted with the ballast of years. My father moved. He had been a statue of iron by the counter, his face a gray, shocked blank. He finally let go of the carving knife. He looked at his hands, as if he didn't recognize them. He looked around the bright, sunny kitchen, at the plates of cold, congealed food, at the picked-over skeleton of the turkey. He looked at all of it as if he were a stranger who had just wandered into the wrong house. His gaze fell on the corner of the room, the awkward, useless corner, the one wedged by the fireplace, the one that was always too hot, the one where my seat, my permanent, invisible seat, had always been. He walked over to it, slowly. The chair was still there, pushed in. He pulled it out, the sound of the wooden legs scraping against the floor a violation of the silence. And then he sat down in it. He sat down in my chair, the one by the fire, the one with the wrong name. He sat there, a tall man made small by the cramped, awkward space, and he looked up at me from the shadows. His voice was not the booming, performative instrument I had known my entire life. It was a rasp. It was the sound of a man who had been hollowed out. "How much?" he asked. I thought, for a second, he meant the money again, but his eyes were not on me. They were on the wall in front of him, the spot where the fire extinguisher used to hang. How much did I miss? The question was a confession. It was the first true thing he had ever asked me. He wasn't asking about the company. He was asking about the science fairs, the graduations, the late nights at the port, the terror of the first failed pitch, the cold pizza, the loneliness. He was asking about the entire lifetime he had spent focused on the wrong daughter. I let the question sit in the air. I could have been cruel. I could have listed every single event. I could have pulled out a ledger of his failures. But I just looked at him. A man collapsed in my tiny, forgotten seat. "A lot," I said, my voice soft. It was not an accusation, it was a fact. "You missed a lot, almost all of it." He flinched, his eyes closing. He had expected me to soften it, to say, "It's okay." I did not. "But," I continued, and his eyes opened, "there are still things to see, things that are happening right now. The trucks with the silver spiral are on the road today. The food hub is open. There are things to see, if you choose to look." I did not offer forgiveness. I did not offer comfort. I offered an observation. The present was still available. A choice was still available. It was Marin who broke. She had been preternaturally still, watching this exchange between me, our mother, and our father. She was the sun, and she had just watched her entire solar system reorient itself around a new, massive, blazing star. She was now a cold, dark rock. A single ragged sob tore out of her. It wasn't her practiced, delicate cry. It was an ugly, animal sound of pure panic. "I'm sorry," she whispered, the words dissolving into tears. "I'm so sorry, Laura." My mother moved toward her, instinctively. "Oh, honey, no. This isn't—" "No!" Marin's voice was a shriek. She looked at our mother. "Stop it! Just stop!" She turned back to me, her face a mess of running mascara and genuine terror. I was so afraid." "Afraid of what? Marin?" I asked. I wasn't her sister. I was an auditor. I needed the data. "Of you," she cried. "Of this. I knew. I always knew you were smarter, stronger. I knew it. And Mom and Dad, they always said that I had to be strong so you could shine." I finished for her. "Yes," she said, grabbing the edge of the table. "And I had to shine. I had to. It was the only thing I knew how to do. It was my job. And I thought if I didn't, if I stopped, and if you started." She looked at me, her eyes wide with the simple, devastating truth. "I thought I would disappear. I thought if you ever really shone, there would be no light left for me at all. I thought I would just be gone." There it was, the entire, rotten, broken core of our family dynamic. She was not a sun. She was a mirror, desperately reflecting the light they had demanded she produce, and I was the foundation, buried in the dark, told that my only purpose was to hold her up. We were both prisoners of the same system. I looked at her, this stranger who was my sister, and for the first time, I didn't feel anger. I felt a vast, cold pity. The room was raw. The confessions were finished. The silence returned. But it was an expectant silence now. All the pieces were on the table. What happened next? My mother was staring at the floor. My father was still in my chair. My sister was weeping quietly. They were all looking at me. They were waiting for me to fix it, to offer the absolution, to tell them it was okay, to invite them onto the new, massive ship I had built. I reached into the pocket of my coat, which I had never taken off. I pulled out the crisp, cream-colored place card from last night. I walked to the kitchen table, the one where we had eaten countless leftover brunches in silence. I placed the card in the absolute center, on the polished, empty wood. The 3 words I had written faced up at all of them. For who shows up? This is the new rule, I said, my voice clear and final. It was not a discussion, it was a decree. The performance is over. The stage is dark. I looked at my mother. It's not about what people think. It's not about filling every seat to look good. I looked at my father. It's not about sitting in the dark and wondering what you missed. I looked at Marin. And it's not about being afraid that someone else's light will put yours out. I tapped the card. It's about this, showing up, really, authentically, and honestly showing up. It means you listen. It means you see the person in front of you. It means you learn how to spell their name. You don't get a seat at the table because you are family. You get a seat at the table because you choose to be present. That's the only rule. I had written a new boundary, and I had written it in ink that would never wash away. My mother stared at the simple, cream-colored card as if it were a legal summons, a sentence, her entire life's work of stage management, of curation, of appearances, had just been rendered obsolete. My father, still sitting in the corner, looked from the card to me. He looked at the hard, clear, unyielding honesty in my eyes, and he nodded. It was a small, slow, deliberate gesture, a signature. He was acknowledging the terms of the new contract. He had received the message. It was Marin who moved. Her hand, shaking, crept across the table. Her fingers, with their perfectly manicured nails and the sapphire ring, ghosted over the edge of the card. She touched it, as if to see if it was real. She looked up at me, her eyes red-rimmed and terrified. "Can we?" she whispered. "Can we? Start over? Can I show up?" I looked at her, and I did not smile. I did not open my arms. I did not give her the comfort she craved. "That," I said, "depends entirely on how you keep your word the next time, and the time after that." I left the house without another word. The place card sat in the center of the table, a stark white island in a sea of polished wood. Marin's quiet sobs and my mother's stunned silence followed me down the hall. But I did not turn. I closed the front door, the click of the latch precise and final, and walked out into the cold, gray morning. I didn't drive to the airport. I drove to the coast, to the old fish cannery. The air was different here. The salt was sharper, mixed with the industrial smell of old iron and diesel from the docks, the smells of my first escape at the Kilton Bay port. I parked the rental car, and as I stepped out, a new scent cut through the cold, warm bread, and the sharp, bright tang of citrus. The June Ellery Food Hub was already alive. A refrigerated truck, one of our trucks, with the silver spiral logo gleaming on the side, was backed into the loading bay. Volunteers, bundled in jackets and hats, were unloading crates. I saw the manager I had hired, a woman who had worked for 2 decades on the loading docks with Sal, directing the flow with the sharp, efficient grace of a true logistics professional. The system was working. I walked to the front entrance, the one that used to be a rusted-out metal door. It was new, clean, and made of glass. Above it was the sign, the simple plank of carved wood I had commissioned. It was not a grand bronze plaque, it was just wood, sealed against the salt air. It read, in my grandmother's simple, strong handwriting, which I'd had digitized from her letters, "The June Ellery Food Hub." And beneath it, in a clean, modern font, was the true mission, the one I had written. You don't need an invitation to belong. Pull up a chair. It was the antithesis of my mother's, "Stop by if you're free." It was the antithesis of the Lara place card at the corner table. This was not a house you had to be invited into. This was a space that belonged, by default, to anyone who needed it. The chairs were already there. I walked inside. The cavernous, cold building I had bought was transformed. It was warm. It was bright. The concrete floors were painted, and the air was filled with the smell of the small, commercial-grade bakery we had installed in the back. It was baking fresh bread that would be on the shelves of every food pantry in the county by noon. The scent of oranges was coming from a massive pallet of fresh fruit that our system had diverted from a Cascadia Foods regional center. Surplus, not waste. This was not a place of sad, dented cans. It was a place of dignity. It was the Equiflow engine, my engine, turned toward the purpose of community. A small girl, probably 8 or 9 years old, was standing by the door with her mother. She was watching the volunteers, her eyes wide. She was holding a worn, empty backpack. She saw me looking at her, then looked down at the silver spiral pin on my coat. "Are you the boss of the spiral?" she asked, her voice small. Her mother looked mortified. "Maya, don't bother the—" She trailed off, not knowing what to call me. I crouched down so I was at her level. "I'm not the boss of it," I said. "I'm just part of the team. I'm Laura." "I like the spiral," she whispered. "It looks fast. My dad says your trucks are always on time. He says you're the ones who brought the good milk." I smiled. The good milk, not the near-expired, watery stuff. The real thing. "I have a few stickers of it. Would you like one for your bag?" She nodded, her eyes bright. I pulled a small sheet of logo stickers from my wallet. I always carried them. I peeled one off, the clean silver spiral, and handed it to her. She took it with a reverence that was almost painful and pressed it onto the faded canvas of her backpack. She looked at me, her face serious. "Is this your place?" I thought of my mother's perfect dining room, a place I had never belonged. I looked at this loud, warm, functional space, smelling of bread and oranges, filled with strangers. "No," I said. "This is our place, mine, and yours. You always have a chair here." Her mother's eyes filled with tears. I stood up, gave the woman a small nod, and walked back out into the cold. I had work to do. I got back into the anonymous rental car. The silence was absolute after the warmth of the hub. I sat for a long moment, the key in the ignition. I had drawn the new boundaries. I had laid down the new law. But a boundary is just a wall if it doesn't have a gate, a test. My goodwill had to have teeth. It had to have rules. I pulled out my phone. I scrolled to Mom. My thumb hovered over the call button. I was not calling for forgiveness. I was not calling to apologize for the bomb I had detonated. I was calling to set the first test. I pressed the button. It rang once, twice, 3 times. I expected it to go to voicemail. I expected her to be unable, or unwilling, to talk to me. She picked up on the 4th ring. "Laura?" Her voice was not the high, brittle, hostess voice. It was not the thin, accusing whine from the kitchen. It was a voice I had never heard before. It was small. It was tired. It was empty. "Hi, Mom?" Silence. I could hear her breathing on the other end. She was waiting for me to yell, or to cry, or to apologize. I did none of those things. I was just a person, stating a fact. "I'm giving a talk next week," I said, my voice calm, professional. "At the Pine Harbor Community Center. It's about the fund, and about the work Equiflow is doing in the region." More silence. I could picture her, standing in the kitchen, staring at the white card I had left on the table. "It's on Thursday, at 7 p.m. I am inviting you and Dad to come." It was not a plea. It was not an olive branch. It was a formal invitation to a public event on my territory. It was a chance to show up. She was quiet for so long. I thought the line had dropped. I heard a small, choked sound. "Laura, I don't—" She stopped. I heard her take a shaky breath. What you said. Your father." "The talk is Thursday at 7, I repeated. "It's an invitation, that's all." She said, and her voice was a whisper. I want to go." Another pause, as if she was listening to someone, or something, in the room with her. I think your father wants to go, too." It was not a promise. It was not a commitment. It was the faintest, most fragile wisp of intention. It was the first time she had ever responded to one of my invitations with anything other than, "That's nice." "Okay," I said. My voice was level. I would not give her praise for this. I would not give her absolution. I would simply acknowledge the data point. "I will make sure there are 2 seats for you." I ended the call. I didn't drive to the airport. Not yet. I had one last stop. I drove back through the quiet, winding streets of my hometown. I drove past the library where I had downloaded corrupted PDFs. I drove past the high school where I had stood on a stage, staring at empty chairs. I turned onto my parents' street. I didn't stop. I didn't even slow down. I just looked. The house was quiet. It looked exactly the same. A perfect white colonial, with perfect dark green shutters, a postcard of a happy life. But I looked at the window of the dining room, the room where I had always been invisible, and I saw it. On the corner table, the one that used to be mine, the one wedged by the fireplace. Someone, my mother, my father, it didn't matter. Someone had taken the small, wiry bouquet of wild asters I had left on the empty chair. They had put them in a simple glass of water. And next to the glass, placed neatly, deliberately, so it was visible from the street, was the cream-colored place card. For who shows up? It was not a miracle. It was not a magical reconciliation. It was not forgiveness. The last 2 decades had not been erased. The scars were all still there. But it was a sign. It was a single, tiny, fragile signal in a sea of noise. It was the first, quiet acknowledgement that the old rules were gone. It was a silent, whispered statement. It was the first sign of a will to arrive. A cold, salt wind blew off the harbor, rattling the bare branches of the oak trees. I turned the car, my heart not heavy, not light, but balanced. I drove away from the house, toward the highway, toward the airport, toward my home in Portland. The tide was going out, and for the first time in my life, I felt the pull of it in my own chest, a gentle, steady, easing of pressure. The empty chairs in my life were no longer a monument to my loneliness. They were not a symbol of who had failed to be there. They were just chairs. Empty. Waiting. They were spaces of potential. They were reserved, not for family, not for obligation, but for those who had the courage and the integrity to show up. The Pine Harbor Community Center was not the sleek, glass-walled conference center I was used to. It was a gymnasium. It smelled like floor wax, old coffee, and the faint, dusty scent of folded bleachers. The lighting was fluorescent and unforgiving. It was real. It was the perfect place. The room was full. Every metal folding chair was taken. I saw the faces of the town, the librarian who used to let me keep the old PDFs, the high school teachers who had watched me stand alone on stage, the volunteers from the food hub, the local paper, the Pine Harbor Gazette, had a reporter in the third row, scribbling in a notepad. There were no streamers, no thumping entrance music, no venture capital bloggers. It was just the town. In the front row, exactly in the center, were 2 empty chairs. My team had placed them there at my request. They were identical to all the others, but on the back of each, a simple laminated card was hung. It read, "For who shows up." I stood at the simple wooden podium. I talked about Equiflow. I didn't use the jargon of Silicon Valley. I used the language of the Kilton Bay docks. I talked about bottlenecks. I talked about waste. I talked about how a truck sitting idle in a yard was the same as a kid sitting hungry in a classroom. It was a failure of the system. My grandmother, June Ellery, I said, my voice steady, taught me 2 things in her kitchen. First, that there is always enough butter and cinnamon to make a cold day warm. And second, that you must write your own voice before the world writes it for you. My company, Equiflow, is built on that idea. We built our own voice. We believe that equity can be engineered, that fairness isn't a vague, sentimental wish. It's a design choice. It's a system. Our founding principle is simple: build the table, and then add chairs. You don't wait for an invitation to the table that exists. You build a new one, and you make it bigger. I finished my prepared remarks and opened the floor. Hands went up. Questions about the food hub. Questions about the data. Then, Mr. Henderson, my old physics teacher, stood up in the back. He looked old, but his eyes were the same, sharp and kind. "Laura," he said, his voice clear in the quiet gym. "This is incredible. What you've built is, well, it's a testament, but I have a hard question. Your principle. Add chairs. What about the people who already had a seat at the table, but kept it empty? What about the people who ignored you, who forgot you, who didn't show up when you needed them? What if they want a chair now? Does your system have room for forgiveness?" The room went silent. This was not about logistics. This was about them, about me. He had just asked, in the most public, gentle way possible, about my family. I gripped the podium. I was searching for the honest answer, the one that wasn't a platitude. And as the silence stretched, the main doors at the back of the gymnasium creaked open. 2 people slipped in, their faces pale in the harsh light. They were late. It was my mother and my father. My mother's eyes darted around, seeing the packed room, her face tight with anxiety. She was looking for a place to hide, an empty patch of wall in the back, behind the bleachers. My father saw her, then looked past her, his gaze scanning the crowd. He saw me, on the stage, and then he saw the 2 empty chairs in the front row, the 2 chairs with the white cards hanging from them. He touched my mother's arm. He didn't point. He just started walking. He walked past the back row. He walked down the center aisle, past the reporter, past my old teachers, my mother, looking terrified, followed in his wake. They didn't stop. They walked all the way to the front row. They stood in front of the 2 empty chairs. My father looked at the card. "For who shows up?" He looked at me. Then he sat down. My mother paused, her hands trembling. She looked at the chair, at me, and then, in front of the entire town, she sat down next to him. I let out a breath I didn't know I was holding. Mr. Henderson was still standing, waiting for his answer. I looked at him. "Does my system have room for forgiveness?" I repeated, my voice not quite steady. It has room for action. It has room for people who are willing to show up." My mother, sitting in the front row, flinched, and then she did the hardest thing I have ever seen her do. She stood up. She was trembling, visibly. This was her stage, the town, her audience, but the script was gone. She was holding her handbag so tightly her knuckles were white. She turned, not to me, but to the room, to Mr. Henderson. She started, and her voice cracked. She cleared her throat. We were the parents he's asking about." A collective, quiet gasp went through the gym. This was not on the agenda. "We were the ones," my mother continued, her voice shaking but gaining a strange, terrible strength, "who didn't see, who didn't listen. We didn't show up when we were needed, for years." She looked at my father, who was staring at his hands. He nodded. "Once. We didn't show up," she repeated. Then she turned, her eyes finding mine on the stage. "But we are here today. We are here." She sat down, her face ashen. The silence in the room was absolute. This was the real speech, the real climax. The town of Pine Harbor had just witnessed a confession. What would I do? Would I go to her? Would I hug her? Would I cry and offer the emotional, cinematic reconciliation everyone craved? I looked at her, at my father, sitting there, exposed and raw in the front row. I did not move from the podium. "Thank you for showing up," I said, and my voice was quiet, but it was amplified by the microphone. It was not warm. It was not cold. It was clear. "Thank you for being here." I turned to the side of the stage. where my team was standing, looking just as stunned as everyone else. "Ava, could you bring that clipboard out, please?" Ava, recovering, nodded and grabbed a clipboard from the table. "The June Ellery Food Hub," I said, addressing the room again, "is a success because of our system, but it runs on volunteers. It runs on people who choose to dedicate their time, not just once, for a photo, but consistently. We need people to sort produce, to manage inventory, to drive the trucks. The work is hard, and it is not glamorous." I looked directly at my parents. "This is the sign-up sheet for the next month of shifts. We have an opening on Tuesday and Thursday mornings, from 6 a.m. to 10 a.m. I placed the clipboard on the edge of the stage, directly in front of their chairs. I had not offered them absolution. I had offered them a job. I had offered them a measurable, difficult, unglamorous action. Kindness, with discipline. A way to earn the chair they were sitting in. My father looked at the clipboard, then at me, and he gave me the smallest, almost imperceptible nod. He understood. This was the new system. Before the room could fully process this, another person stood up, near the back, Marin. She looked different. Her hair was pulled back. She wasn't wearing silk. She was in jeans and a simple sweater. She looked like a person, not a performance. "Laura," she said, and her voice was shaky. She wasn't asking for forgiveness. She was asking a question. I have a question about my shop in Charleston." I nodded. "Go ahead, Marin." "My suppliers," she said. "The artisans, I don't really know where they get their wood or their glass. You talked about equity in the supply chain, about making it transparent." She was terrified, but she was pushing through. "I want that for my store. I want to be able to prove that my authenticity is real. Can Equiflow, can you help me do that, as a client?" She had offered me the one thing I could accept, not a tearful sisterly plea, a business proposal, a structured, professional collaboration. "Yes," I said, "we can do that. Our small business division can set up a consultation." She nodded, her face tight with relief, and sat down. The room was buzzing. The foundations had been reset, right in front of them. "I have one last announcement," I said, my voice rising over the noise. "The work we've done at the June Ellery Food Hub, it's just the first phase. That old fish warehouse is just a building. But starting next quarter, Equiflow, in partnership with the state, will be funding its complete conversion." I clicked to the final slide. It was a beautiful, simple architectural rendering. "It will become the Ellery Center," I announced. "It will still have the Smart Food Hub, but it will also have a community kitchen for vocational training. It will have a suite of classrooms for free coding and logistics workshops. It will be a place, run by our system, to give everyone in this town the tools to build their own table." This time, the applause was real. It wasn't polite. It was loud. It was thundering. It was the sound of a town waking up. I saw my physics teacher, Mr. Henderson, wiping his eyes. I saw the girl from the food hub, Maya, standing on her chair and clapping. The real climax, for me, didn't happen on the stage. It happened as the crowd was filtering out. It was the sound of a cheap pen scratching on paper. I looked down. My father was leaning over the clipboard, his face set in concentration. He was signing his name, and my mother's, for the 6 a.m. shift, every Tuesday, every Thursday. He was signing the contract. As people left the gymnasium, they walked past a new, permanent addition by the doorway. My team had installed it that afternoon. It was a simple, black frame, and inside it, under glass, was the cream-colored place card I had left on my parents' table. "For who shows up?" I watched as people filed out. One by one, almost unconsciously. They would pause, they would look at the card, and many of them, my teacher, the volunteers, the reporter, even Maya's mom. They reached out. They tapped the glass, just once, like a promise. "Thank you so much for listening to my story. I'd love to know where in the world you're tuning in from, so please drop a comment below and share your thoughts. If this story resonated with you, please subscribe to Lila Revenge Stories. Give this video a like, and show your support by hitting that hype button so more people can hear it.